Hi, in this session we're going to focus on functions and how to write functions. Use RStudio for that. And we'll also review a little bit about data frames. When we're writing functions, we'll have to use this part up here. Kind of is conceptually easier to have the code. We can kind of store the function and then use the function down in our console. Now, maybe before we actually get started in writing a function, one question I often get asked about things like the mtcars data set is how do I get access to the rows and columns? So if you take a look at mtcars, we have the column headers and the row headers, if you will. And how do we get access to that? Because if we do mtcars sub11, it gives us the first data element, 21, but not the MPG or that it's a Mazda RX-4. So my question to you is, how do we get access to that? Well, let's take a look. Column names of mtcars gives you all the column names. And my guess is you can guess that row names gives the different car names, row names. We could store this. So our names, and then we can access, if you remember, the highest MPG car was at 20th index, Toyota Corolla. So that's how we can do that, and we can do the same thing with column names, of course. So let's use that newfound knowledge to start writing some functions. I'm going to write the functions up here, as I said. And let's write a fairly simple function. So which function do we want to write? How about we write a function called best MPG. We're going to say it's a function, no parameters. So here's the template of a function. Remember, this is the name of the function, best MPG. This is a keyword that tells R that we're writing a function. We had parameters in here, but right now we're not going to pass any. And then anything in between that squirrely bracket and the closed squirrely bracket is going to be the code. So right now there's no code. So what would be a good code to do? So we can do the index of best MPG is, if you remember from previous time, which.max. That gives us the index. That's not really what we want. So we're going to write another line of code. And then we can return that car variable. Okay, so we take the index of the maximum of the cars from an MPG perspective, and we get that, and that gives you an entire row. Now in order to run this in R, highlight it all. You can see down here it ran all the code. Now we can test it. We'll test it up here too. And again, no parameter, so we just use that line of code. We say run, and there it is. And I can type it down here too. If I type best MPG without parentheses, it just shows me the definition of it. With the parentheses, start and close, we're using the function. Here it's treating like a variable and saying here's what the variable means. It means it's a function. So that's a pretty simple function. It doesn't really get us much that's useful, but it's a start. Maybe we can expand this to say, here, I'll create another function rather than expand it. How about we get the name of it, use our newfound knowledge of the car names. So we're creating a new function, best MPG name. It's a function. We're still going to have no parameters, for example. And now what we're going to do is we've got this, and then we have to just kind of use the row names. So we could do here, get the row names of mtcars, and get them the index that we need. Kind of a complicated thing, so here we are. Calling a function of row names of mtcars. It'll generate an array, so maybe make that a little simpler, a little more clear. We'll create a variable. Our names, now we do our names of that index, we return that car. So we do the same thing. We run all this code, and then we test the function. There we go. So it worked as we expected. It's not a very useful function, but again, we can kind of encapsulate it. So now, before we make it useful, let me type a line of code in here and let me ask you what you think it's going to do. How about we do how about this? So that function you know. So what will this do? Well, only one way to find out what it will do. Let's run that line of code. So it returns a vector of true and false, where it tells you kind of which index is that column, because we're talking about column names. So we can store that as an answer to something. See what that returns. It returns all of them, right? Tells you which one's true, but everything else is false. Now let's write our function based on this newfound knowledge. So we'll take this, and we'll start with that. So again, this is the same function as before. But maybe now what we'll do is we'll pass in a column name. Or column.index. Let's make it simpler. So we're going to pass in an index, and then we're going to return that column index. Again, we're going to take, instead of empty_cars $mpg, we do empty_cars all the rows and just the column.index. So what this is doing is it's returning the columns we want, the column index. We return that. So let's run this and see what happens. And we're just going to call this best with index. Now is this going to work the way you expect? Best with index. We have to pass an index, column index. How about the first one? Do you think that's going to work? Huh. Let's have a typo. Best with index that way. I think that's going to work. Wow, look at that. Let's try to understand what's going on here. So which.max, it's obviously the new line of code. And column index, if you remember, is 1. So we'll just do this. See what that's doing. So it's saying, take a look at the first column, and if you kind of take a look at that, empty cars, the first, right? So that's just the MPG. So it's basically just doing that. But now, rather than just always doing MPG, I can do the third column. Now, it's not very user-friendly, because I really don't remember what the sixth column, I mean, I can take a look. So the third one was displacement, and the sixth one was 4, 5, 6 was weight. So the heaviest car was a Lincoln Continental. The car with the most displacement was a Cadillac Fleetwood. But maybe it would be easier to actually put in displacement. So we can do that as well. The way we do that is we're going to take the function and we're going to update one more time. And we're just going to call this best. You kind of like that. Now we're going to pass the column name. So it would be something like MPG or something like that. So we pass in column name. Then we need to get the index. Use the which function. So we're saying, give us the index where column names of the empty cars equals the actual column name passed in, and we have everything else we want. Let's see if that works. We think that's going to work. Look at that. Again, we can kind of play around. We have this. Let's see what that does. Help you understand it. Oops. Sorry, let's get this correct. So if we say which one is here, which equals a string MPG, it's the first one. Now it has to be a string, because what is this going to do? Right, it's going to give you an error because it thinks MPG is a variable. How about if we do this is not a column? What is that going to do? Turn 0, it says it can't find it. It's not an error like the other one, but it's going to give you that. So at the end of the day, we kind of have our function here, and a little bit of review how to kind of access the different rows and columns within the empty cars data set. But more importantly, we went over writing functions. Remember, every function returns something. Might have a parameter, might have more than one, doesn't have to have any. And these brackets are codes. And then code in here is any code that we could be writing down here. So I think we'll end with that today.